In July 2011, the body of 32-year-old Rebecca Zahau was found hanging from a balcony at a Coronado mansion where she lived with her boyfriend, millionaire pharmaceuticals tycoon Jonah Shacknai. Her boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, reported finding her body, which had been gagged with a t-shirt and bound at the hands and feet. A strange message was scrawled in black paint on the bedroom door. She saved him, can he save her? Zahau's death came just days after her boyfriend's 6-year-old son, Max, suffered a traumatic fall at the mansion, one that was ultimately fatal. His death was ruled an accident, hers a suicide. But many, including Zahau's family, don't believe that she took her own life. They believe she was murdered. And although no criminal charges have been filed in the case, the Zahau family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Adam Shacknai. A civil trial is now underway in San Diego Superior Court, and we are following it. For the San Diego Union-Tribune, I'm Lauren Flynn. This is Under the Gavel. Our court reporter, Pauline Repard, covered the first 2 days of the trial, which began February 28th. What was the atmosphere like in the courtroom?
It was, I think, a little bit tense, a lot of anticipation by people of how this would all play out. There were a lot of attorneys for Adam Shacknai on the defense team, and there was just the one plaintiff's attorney, Keith Greer, for the plaintiff's attorney for Rebecca's family, and quite a few reporters in the room, some from national news programs, and then, of course, obviously local media. And Rebecca's boyfriend, Jonah Shacknai, was there also, and her mother and sister.
What is Rebecca's family's theory about the case?
Their theory is that she was definitely murdered. They've never accepted that she had committed suicide. They think her Christian faith was too strong, that she had no reason to. They just do not buy that at all. The minute the Sheriff's Department and our county medical examiner gave that ruling, the family did not accept it. The alternative is that it was murder, and they believe that. And since Adam Shacknai was the only other person there on the grounds over the night, they have focused on him as a suspect in the case. They think that he may have attacked her sexually and then hit her on the head. We're not sure of what order everything happened. It was nobody saw it, but hit her on the head, strangled her, bound her with the ropes, and shoved her over a second floor balcony to an outdoor courtyard. And that his 911 call the next morning reporting that he had just now found her hanging would have been a ruse and not a genuine discovery. The Sheriff's Department completely said they found no evidence against Adam and therefore would not be filing any charges against him. So this is definitely not a criminal case. He doesn't face any prison. Wrongful death lawsuit, they're asking for damages. And if the jury finds him guilty, then they could impose financial penalties on him.
I'm curious, as someone who is not familiar with this, how does someone get to civil court? Is it just anyone can go, or does there have to be a certain amount of evidence? Or
anyone can file a civil suit, but a judge has a right to look at it and say, you've got no grounds here. Now, usually the person being sued would raise that to the judge. They might file a motion to dismiss, saying there is no legitimate cause of action here. There are no legitimate grounds for you to sue me. Therefore, will the judge please dismiss the whole thing? The judge would review it and could rule either way, that, no, I do find grounds and there is enough factual basis that a jury could legitimately look at this and decide, or no, this lawsuit offers nothing legally. In this case, the plaintiff's attorney has filed at least four amended complaints, changing it each time to amend the charges against Adam. Initially, the lawsuit had also included the ex-wife and her twin sister of Rebecca's boyfriend, and the plaintiff's attorney found evidence later that could not be overlooked, that those two women were not involved. And he held a press conference to very publicly remove them from the case.
Through multiple sources, we have confirmed that Dina Shacknai was at Rady's Children's Hospital in the pediatric intensive care unit with her son, Max, that evening. And in particular, at the time when the scream was heard by the neighbor, it was a neighbor in Coronado, a neighbor at the Spreckles mansion, that stated that she heard a woman screaming about 11:30 that evening, which we believe was Rebecca screaming at that time. That at that time, within minutes, Dina is seen on the cameras at the hospital. The evidence has also shown that Nina Romano is not involved in any way in Rebecca's death, and thus, based on this evidence, we are dismissing from the case both Nina Romano and Dina Shacknai.
That left Adam Shacknai as the only remaining defendant. So anyone can sue. The person being sued has a right to challenge whether there's any basis. The judge can rule. And in fact, early on had said that this lawsuit isn't good enough. And so it got amended and amended.
I see. So last week on Wednesday, February 28th, the trial began. There were opening statements. Tell us about those opening statements.
All right. The plaintiff's attorney goes first to set out to the jurors what his case is all about. Keith Greer talked for about an hour and a half and went through many of his pieces of evidence that he hoped to introduce and talked about some of the testimony that he expected the jurors to hear. And his point is that Rebecca clearly was hanging from a rope in which very intricate knots had been tied. There were very bizarre circumstances around her death. So he set about explaining them in terms of there having been a murder. And some injuries to her brain, he explained, were blows inflicted, he believes, by Adam Shacknai. He said that certain injuries to her neck indicated that she was strangled before she was left hanging by the noose. He referred to a adhesive tape residue on her legs, suggesting that she had been bound by the tape before she was bound by ropes that were gotten out of the garage at the house. He noted that Adam Shacknai makes his living as a tugboat captain. He lives in Memphis, and that he would be very familiar with making looping kind of intricate knots, which were found around Rebecca's wrists and feet. He would have known how to get those on her, and he would have been strong enough, according to Keith Greer, to shove or push her body over the balcony railing. Now, the defense attorney for Adam, his name is Daniel Webb, he also spoke for about an hour and a half on his opening statements after Greer was finished and told the jury that out of all the bits of evidence of rope and knives and balconies and footprints, railings, and so on, that not one bit of Adam Shacknai's DNA or fingerprints or footprints appeared on any part of the crime scene. He said that there will be no evidence to put his client at the various scenes of the various events leading up to Rebecca's death until Adam makes the 911 call to Coronado Police and Fire saying, "I've found this woman hanging, and I believe she's dead." Then he was still on the phone with the 911 operator when he shoved a table pretty much underneath her and climbed up on it and cut the rope to lay her on the ground. And that's where she was when the police and fire got there. So that's the main defense, is that, one, the sheriff's department and the medical examiner's office found that it was suicide. So from the defense standpoint, there was no murder. The second step was, if there was a murder, there's not one shred of evidence placing Adam there in the scene as the murderer, rather than just the person who found her.
And I mean, this hasn't been addressed yet in this case, but I would imagine that it has been addressed. That was there any other DNA that wasn't from the family, wasn't from the people who are involved in this specific case?
Not that I've ever heard mentioned. Neither attorney addressed any mysterious third-party DNA. The Shacknai family had used the mansion before, and Rebecca had been there with Jonah and Max and Rebecca's little sister and Jonah's older children. They'd all been there, so there would have been lots of DNA and lots of prints. I don't believe the sheriff's department tried to dust and collect DNA off of all parts of the mansion. They focused on the guest bedroom where the noose was tied off to a bed. And this is also the bedroom where the door had the infamous scrawled mystical message saying, "She saved him, can he save her?" The defense suggests nobody can fully understand what that means. The family and the plaintiffs have a theory.
It's assumed by many that the she refers to Rebecca and the he refers to Max.
Right.
But nobody really knows because it is so cryptic.
Right. That seems like the most likely theory, especially if she wrote that. If she were killed by someone else and that was written by someone else, it makes it a little harder to understand the context. If you believed that she saved Max, then what would be the motive for killing her because he did not ultimately survive? It gets murky quickly.
Right. And do you, is there any indication that might get brought up during the trial?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Oh, yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Both attorneys referred to it in their opening statements, and if the door itself isn't admitted as evidence, certainly photographs of the words will be.
Also on Wednesday, Rebecca's sister testified.
Right. Her name is Mary Zahau Lehner, and she was the first witness in this case. She talked a lot about the family's history, the background of them being born in Burma and then becoming political refugees living in India and Nepal before settling in Germany, where Mary and Rebecca grew into their teenage years and then went away to college. Rebecca went to a Bible college and Mary went to a regular one. Both women ended up in the United States and eventually brought their parents from Germany to also be in America and helped support them. So Mary talked a lot about that, how culturally that's a thing for adult children to do for their parents to help in their support. And their father was not physically well either, so he couldn't work. Mary also talked a lot about the fact that Rebecca had a strong Christian faith and loved her parents very much, helped with their financial support, and again took that as a serious responsibility. And Mary did not believe that she had any pressing, deep emotional problems that would have led to a suicide. And in fact, in the witness stand, she very clearly said Rebecca was obviously murdered. She said, pretty obvious she was murdered.
Talking about the family history and the money that was being sent back, because I know on Thursday, Rebecca's mother was questioned about that same topic.
Do you have any records that would show any specific amounts of money that Rebecca gave to you between 2001 and 2011?
No. Only with the envelope to the address.
Is that relevant because of the damages they're seeking, or is that or is that relevant to her death and the reasons why she would or wouldn't kill herself?
I think the plaintiffs want to show a very loving, tight-knit family, and so that when they say, we do not believe Rebecca would kill herself, that they have laid that foundation of knowing her and believing they understand Rebecca's motives and feelings on things. Rebecca's mother, whose name is Rebecca Zahau, did testify on Thursday. It was heartbreaking to watch her breaking into tears frequently, thinking about all these things. And she talked about how Rebecca would phone them frequently, would send them money, every month, and sometimes extra when they needed it. She said they would sometimes sing Christian hymns on the phone to cheer each other up if they were down. The defense lawyer asked the mother questions about the relationship and tried to show a little bit of more gray area in there.
Before you moved to the United States, from 2001 through the time you moved to the United States, you saw Rebecca only one time, correct?
อาศิเลคนนี้คุณท่องที่ประคคุณท่องที่ประชานั้นผมได้อยู่ในที่มีฐานะที่ไปร่วมนั้นต้องที่หมอจะได้แบบนั้นต้อง so they say yes.
The mother, who's a limited English speaker, did not seem to know a lot of those details about Rebecca's life. Again, we don't have an explanation of how those questions are relevant, but it seems to indicate perhaps that the mother just did not know everything going on in Rebecca's life and in her mind.
Also on Thursday, a fingerprint expert, is that her title?
Right, a forensics expert. Fingerprints is one of her specialties. Footprints, impressions, tire impressions, a variety of things. But fingerprints and footprints were what were at the mansion scene for her to look at. Her name is Lisa DeMeo. She had looked over the fingerprint record that the Sheriff's Crime Lab had taken in this case, and she looked over reports and the autopsy report. So she testified that Rebecca's fingerprints or palm prints and footprints were found in various locations of the guest bedroom in question. She also testified that none of Adam's fingerprints were removed from any surface by the crime lab.
From a fingerprint standpoint, you saw no evidence that showed that the man sitting here, Adam Shacknai, murdered Rebecca, correct?
Regarding fingerprints?
Yes.
There's no fingerprints that came back to Adam Shacknai. The latent print powder is going to pick up on not just fingerprints, but other, disturbances on the surface. And this shows me that those areas are void of, to even attract the fingerprint powder. It's almost like it's like a void, like a white line above the doorknob and below the doorknob, where the powder did not even adhere.
It's interesting that the doorknob, where someone would think...
Right, the doorknob had no prints, but
like it had been wiped.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
One of the things that's very murky about the whole thing is how Rebecca's fingerprints can be all over this room and Adam's not. If he was there, how did he so carefully and selectively remove just his own fingerprints and yet didn't wipe off hers too while he was at it?
Could he have been wearing gloves?
Yes, but then why bother wiping surfaces?
Right. And I would imagine in this house they've got a house cleaner that comes every once in a while, and maybe she's disinfecting things, and all she thinks to disinfect is the doorknob.
Right. Anything's possible like that, or even if there's no housekeeper, if Rebecca cleaned,
right,
she could wipe things off. Or she used that room for a painting studio. What if she'd dabbed paint somewhere and then wiped it all off?
It's so tricky.
Yeah. And another point that Lisa DeMeo made was that she went in person to the sheriff's evidence room to look at a couple of pieces of physical evidence with her own eyes, a couple of the knives in particular.
And the replications of those were brought into the courtroom, is that right?
Right.
What was the significance of that?
Well, there was one chef's knife that had Rebecca's fingerprints on the blade of the knife rather than the handle. And Keith Greer, in his opening statements, took great pains to place his fingers in the exact same positions with his left and right hand. And when he held the knife in front of him with the blade pointing upward, his hands were in a very awkward position of being tensed in kind of wrong way. And he said it doesn't make any sense that anybody would hold a knife in this way. But when he pulled his hands behind his back and placed his fingers there, then it seemed to line up with a logical way to grasp a blade if, as he said, you were trying to saw through the ropes around your hands. He held it so that the blade was facing inward toward his back and pointing upward. The fingerprint expert agreed that each, the index finger, middle finger, and so on, that he was placing them correctly on what had been hers. So his theory on that was that she did indeed grab that knife off the floor or somewhere in an attempt to free herself before being strangled, presumably, and then thrown over the balcony. The expert did acknowledge that the ropes around her wrists showed no signs of actually being cut in such a manner. And it would have been pretty awkward to move your hands in such a way to be effective that way. There was a second knife there, a steak knife, that was found to have residue of blood on the handle of the knife, but not on the blade. And it was Rebecca's blood. Nobody challenged that. And since she had no cuts or big scrapes or other bleeding wounds on her body when she was found.
Reviewing all of the blood evidence in the criminal file, did you make a determination as to what the likely source of the blood on the knife was?
Well, we already know it was Rebecca's blood through the DNA, and the only source of blood or bleeding from Ms. Zahau was vaginally, from menstrual blood.
So you checked her hands for blood, right?
Yes. In photographs, earliest photographs taken at the scene, there was no blood on her hands.
So the plaintiffs are alleging that knife handle perhaps was used in a sexual assault in a kind of a ugly fashion.
In every story that I read, that we've written, that the UT has written, there's one line about how the Zahau's family attorney says that he believes that there was a murder and that it was sexual in nature.
But that's where it comes from, is
right.
This knife handle.
And I haven't seen anywhere that there's been any evidence of the autopsy saying that there was a sexual assault.
Right. None was ever found.
So, Pauline, this trial continues next week.
Right. It picks up again on Monday, and will be going on for most of the month.
And you'll be in court most days? Maybe. We'll see. If not,
be determined.
Well, then we'll interview someone else.
Yeah.
And you'll have stories online?
Yes, we will. The Union-Tribune will be covering this assiduously.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Each week, Under the Gavel will dive into the details of the trial. We'll also have stories on our website, SanDiegoUnionTribune.com, each day court is in session. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date. And if you can, please rate and review this podcast. It would really help us out and let us know what we can do better. If you have any questions, comments, information, notes, anything, please feel free to email me at lauren.flynn@sduniontribune.com. The Under the Gavel team includes executive producer Daniel Wheaton. Editing this week was done by me, Lauren Flynn. Our script was edited by Dana Littlefield. Special thanks to Pauline Repard for her continued coverage of the trial and her willingness to be on the other end of an interview than she is used to. Our artwork is by Gloria Orbegozo and Christina Bivik. Our editorial director is John McCutcheon. For the San Diego Union-Tribune, I'm Lauren Flynn. Thanks for listening.